Here's a fun fact about me. I became a vegetarian because of death metal. For most of my life, my stance on vegetarianism was informed by The Simpsons and South Park, so of course I thought it was only for self-righteous know-it-alls who just make everything worse with their insincere meddling. Then I noticed this amp stack in the background of a Between the Buried and Me show promoting GoVeg.com, a website that, predictably, informs people how to lead vegetarian and vegan lifestyles. It's also run by PETA, so it's not perfect, but its association with an awesome band had planted the subliminal message that vegetarianism might be cool. Years later, a band called Cattle Decapitation got stuck in my head in much the same way an ice pick might, and that clinched it. I made it my New Year's resolution in 2013 to try a vegetarian diet, and I haven't looked back since. One of the most nihilistic art forms out there had helped me to develop serious concern for a cause, and taught me to exercise critical thinking skills when presented with ideas that challenge my worldview, to determine whether or not those ideas have merit. Cattle Decapitation have continued to find success since their transformative impact on my life, and now stand among the biggest names in extreme metal. But their dedication to one fundamentally flawed pet cause has given their once progressive stances a dark turn, and they now share common ground with those who want the worst for our planet. When Cattle Decapitation started out in 1996, they would have been classified as either a power violence band or a gore grind band, which are real names for styles of music that I swear I didn't make up, and both are related to the genre known as grindcore. In case you're unfamiliar, grindcore is among the most inaccessible forms of music ever created. If you've ever heard a parody of metal taken to its logical extreme, that's basically what grindcore aims to be. A blast of the loudest, fastest noises instruments are capable of making, with songs that often last for less than a minute. A good example would be Napalm Death's highly influential song You Suffer, which helped to lay the very foundations of the genre. Here it is now, in its entirety. What a lot of people don't realize about grindcore is that ridiculously heavy music is still ridiculous, and that absurdity is something many grindcore artists intentionally play up for the sake of comedy. Gore grind is a particularly gimmicky offshoot, characterized by lyrics that describe hideous acts of violence, with Cattle Decapitation's personal touch being that they often depict the gruesome treatment of humans in line with the worst ways that humans treat animals. In this way, their unrelenting vulgarity also makes a point about their sincere concerns for animal welfare and environmentalism. Despite having this political stance behind their music though, it would be reasonable to say that Cattle Decap were a joke band for many of their early years, and one with a very morbid and disgusting sense of humor. I'm going to be merciful in this video and present as little of their gory imagery as possible, but if you wanted to explore their early albums on your own, you can enjoy such classics as Testicular Manslaughter, Veal and the Cult of Torture, Pedestrians, The Carcass Derrick, Bukkake Tsunami, and their cover of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, which they titled Scatology Domine. Cattle Decapitation were founded in San Diego, California by Scott Miller, Dave Astor, and Gabe Serbian, all of whom are vegetarians and none of whom are relevant to our story, as they've all since left the band. In 1997, however, the year after their formation, Travis Ryan joined the band as their vocalist and lyricist, and has stayed in that role ever since. Guitarist Josh Elmore joined in 2001 and has also been a core member for over 20 years. Travis and Josh are vegetarians themselves, but none of the other current members live that lifestyle. Those current members include drummer Dave McGraw, who joined in 2007, bassist Olivier Pinard, and rhythm guitarist Belisario DiMuzio, who both became official members in 2018. The band moved away from grindcore after their first album, but they didn't land cleanly in death metal, straddling genres in a way that made it difficult to find an audience for much of the early 2000s. Their 2004 album, Humanure, garnered some attention, mostly by having a cover that visually depicted their entire thesis in a single horrific image, forever burned on the brain of anyone who's ever seen it. But they were still widely considered a joke. They even released a split album the following year with Caninus, the metal band whose vocals were performed by two literal dogs. It wasn't until 2009, with the release of The Harvest Floor, that they fully settled on what is now recognized as their sound. A blend of death metal, black metal, and grindcore with extremely technical musicianship and the highbrow sensibilities of classical music, in stark contrast to their lyrics, which remain gross. The Harvest Floor earned them some mainstream acclaim, but this merely primed the pump for their next album, 2012's Monolith of Inhumanity. This is the moment that established them as a serious force to be reckoned with, landing them a spot on almost every year-end best-of list, and even climbing the US hard rock chart to number 18. Cattle Decapitation had sent a message with their music and with their lyrics, particularly with the album's main set piece, a song called Forced Gender Reassignment. There's a lot that can go wrong when a cisgender person decides to write about trans people, especially one who's known for his sick sense of humor. But I can say, as a trans person myself, I love forced gender reassignment. This song shows nothing but compassion for the struggles faced by trans people, foregoing the band's typical layers of irony to state their unambiguous support without so much as a raised eyebrow or a wisecrack at our expense. The bulk of the song engages in what we'll call a satirical thought experiment that aims to prove the validity of trans identities in the most cattle decapitation way possible. The broad strokes are that it takes people who committed transphobic acts and subjects them to torture and mutilation that causes them to experience gender dysphoria firsthand. This serves as a cathartic effigy burning, but more importantly, it's a statement that gender is something everyone knows about themselves innately, regardless of their body, and to deprive anyone of gender affirmation is itself an act of torture. Forced Gender Reassignment remains the band's best-known song, thanks in large part to its uncompromising support for the correct side of a hot-button issue. Their next album, 2015's The Anthropocene Extinction, would put the large platform they'd earned to use in discussing their primary concern, the environment. However, if there's one underlying weakness in Travis's view on environmentalism, it's his insistence on blaming overpopulation. He once wrote an entire song about the subject, and even mentions it in Forced Gender Reassignment, so it's no surprise that it is alluded to throughout the Anthropocene Extinction. Those last two words were spoken by guest vocalist Phil Anselmo from Pantera. On January 22, 2016, Phil closed that year's Dime Bash celebration by shouting the words "White Power" while giving a Hitler salute. In response to the ensuing outrage, he claimed that he was making a joke about the white wine he'd been drinking backstage, but the incident significantly worsened his pre-existing notoriety for being a closet white supremacist. Now, this all took place after his collaboration with Cattle Decap, but it is darkly appropriate that a song with references to overpopulation would feature an infamous crypto-fascist, because overpopulation is a racist myth. The entire concept is predicated on the idea that the Earth's finite resources have been stretched too thin to sustain the billions of people currently on Earth, pushing those resources into negative values and causing irreparable damage to the environment. Logic dictates that fewer humans therefore means less strain on those resources, and thus everyone could have all they need without harming the planet if only fewer people existed. When you take into account which specific places are most often accused of having too many people, certain trends emerge. Furthermore, this theory falls apart entirely when you consider that there are already individuals who hoard thousands of lifetimes worth of resources, and the systems in place funnel every unclaimed resource to these individuals. Fewer humans would only pour even more into the hands of the few who already have everything, and leave even less of a resistance as they continue to pillage the world. In fact, saving the Earth requires humanity. Humans are a part of the environment, and they always have been, and indigenous peoples across the globe have developed practices to nurture and maintain healthy ecosystems for generations. On the land which the United States of America currently occupies, the indigenous people performed controlled burns to prevent raging forest fires from breaking out, but have long been banned from doing so, resulting in the unstoppable infernos that annually ravage the West Coast. Conversely, when American settlers first began to colonize this land, they intentionally hunted the wild buffalo to the verge of extinction so as to starve out the indigenous people, doing immeasurable damage to the biodiversity of the region in the process. Many years later, when America's intervention in Vietnam wasn't going in their favor, they enacted Operation Ranch Hand, which involved spreading the defoliant Agent Orange across the country and neighboring countries, damaging or destroying over 5 million acres of forests and crops in an effort to deprive the Vietnamese people of their home field advantage. The motto, "Only you can prevent a forest," was used to encourage those who participated in this willful demolition of nature. Declaring that the issue here is simply humans implicates everyone in the problem, when there are clearly people working to solve it and others working to exacerbate it. Imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism are what has destroyed and continues to destroy the planet, and an active, unified effort to resist these things is the only way to undo that damage. Placing the blame on overpopulation is not only a waste of energy, but an insult and threat to those working toward a solution, especially the native cultures across the globe, who protect 80% of the Earth's biodiversity despite being only 5% of the global population. Back in 2015, when the Anthropocene extinction was released, the dire state of the climate crisis was much less widely discussed, and cattle decapitation were on the cutting edge of treating the issue with appropriate gravity. Even though some of their specific concerns were misguided, it gets more right than wrong, and its overall message proved to be prescient. Soon after its release, the effects of climate change became impossible to ignore, and not a single source could argue against the reality of this looming disaster. Not even South Park. It would be 4 years before Cattle Decapitation would release their next album. Plenty of time to prepare an informed message about how to take meaningful action in a world that was more ready than ever to hear what they had to say. Death Atlas was released on November 29th, 2019, and it lets you know from the moment it starts, there will be no detached irony or sense of humor this time. This is serious. Two minutes of bleak ambience underscores spoken words in various languages, taken from the Voyager Golden Record that was launched into space in 1977, representing the unity between all of humanity in the face of this global existential threat. Then we get the first song, The Geocide, a finely crafted work of metal from a band at the top of their game. But I don't know, something about it tells me they might not actually be all that interested in finding realistic ways to save the world. Death Atlas continues to assert their belief that overpopulation is the Earth's biggest problem. Considering this alongside the urgency of the environmental crisis they're tying it to, the implications are grim. Optimistic estimates suggest we have at best a decade to address climate change before the damage is irreversible. So if overpopulation were the issue behind it all, which to reiterate is absolutely not the case, the only solution that would work within the time frame would involve mass death. I have to believe, for my own sake, that most of the people who still push the talking point of overpopulation simply haven't done the math that what they're actually advocating for is genocide. Unfortunately, in the case of cattle decapitation, there can be no claim of such ignorance. That was Travis Ryan explicitly calling for genocide, but you can still tell he's a liberal because he's sad about it. This was from the song Be Still Our Bleeding Hearts, so called because it implores the stereotypical bleeding heart liberals to abandon their concern for the well-being of humans and just hear out what the other side has to offer. Ironically, he makes his case so bluntly that he reveals the flaw in his own argument. If you give the far right an opportunity to state their position as though it has validity, what you end up with is genocide. This would almost be a brilliant work of satire, a la Dead Kennedys Kill the Poor, if Travis didn't unironically stand behind everything he's saying here. Since that does appear to be the case, though, I just have to state for the record that genocide is actually bad, always, and without exception. It never has a pragmatic use or silver lining, it's just evil. If anyone ever defends any act of genocide, or anyone who has ever perpetrated an act of genocide, that person's prescriptions for a better tomorrow are to be disregarded entirely, and they should be treated with the utmost suspicion in all other regards. It's a shame that we're in a world where this even needs to be said, but failure to take these statements to heart will lead to more genocide, and we have a responsibility to make sure that never happens again. Any serious consideration of the concept called ecofascism reveals it to be inherently contradictory. In the article Ecofascism, an examination of the far-right/ecology nexus in the online space by Brian Hughes, Dave Jones, and Amarnath Amarasingham, they write, "Real-world far-right ecologism has inevitably led not to mystical union between race and land, but to routine far-right habits of environmental exploitation in service of hierarchy, domination, and exclusion. Efforts to tie racial and national identities to environmental causes are doomed to fail, but still pose a serious threat, as they can be used to recruit people who wish to do something about the climate crisis into the far right. When push comes to shove, those whose passion for protecting nature is tinged with hatred will have to make a choice, and most will side with hatred to become plain old nature-stomping fascists. A small few among them will go on to commit horrific acts of violence in the name of these beliefs, as was the case with the 2019 mass shootings in El Paso, Texas, and Christchurch, New Zealand, both committed by self-proclaimed eco-fascists. By writing a song meant to push listeners toward right-wing ideology specifically for the purpose of bringing about acts of violence, Cattle Decapitation have created an anthem for eco-fascism. As if Be Still Our Bleeding Hearts wasn't bad enough, the next song, Vulturous, features a shriek of Ave Genocide, which is Latin for Hail Genocide. At this point, it's fair to say that Cattle Decapitation is looking pretty bad. They could have used their platform to condemn the bigotry that drives the fascist death cult like they did a decade ago with forced gender reassignment, but now that trans people just need them to say the words genocide is bad, they're saying the opposite. And of course, were Travis's wish for genocide to be granted, it wouldn't relieve any burden on the Earth's resources. It would just allow capitalists to further concentrate wealth and power so they can do even more damage. This has been demonstrated throughout the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which has allowed billionaires to accrue additional trillions of dollars off the death and suffering of the downtrodden, with no lasting impact on climate change. I bet Travis wouldn't be singing the praises of this sort of mass death. Oh, come on! When Death Atlas was released in November of 2019, the coronavirus was just beginning its global spread. They still caught some flack for putting out a song like this while Asian countries were being ravaged by the plague, but ultimately, this is just a bad joke delivered with the worst possible timing, and a further highlight of how wrong their anti-humanist stances are. That said, here's the shirt they printed in March of 2020 when the global lockdowns first began. It sold out promptly. That's the first half of Death Atlas, and nothing of value has been added to the conversation yet. Fortunately, the second half kicks off with a song called Absolute Destitute, which does have something interesting to say, for a change. These words call out that it's the people in power that are responsible for our oppression and impending doom, and that a defeatist attitude in the face of our existential crisis is unacceptable. I really wish I could say that they pulled on that thread a bit more, and came to the conclusion that the powers that be are just people with names and addresses, and that they're outnumbered tens of thousands to one. Our helplessness is an illusion they wish to perpetuate, and getting past that illusion to organize our superior numbers could literally save the world. Instead of that, this song, which was originally titled Despair Porn, concludes that humanity gets off on depression, and destruction is simply in our nature, meaning of course that it takes the defeatist attitude that it set out to condemn. The band's most recent single, Finish Them, is supposed to be the album's forced gender reassignment. Not because it makes any sort of bold statement though, it just changes time signatures at similar intervals. The theme it explores is so predictable that even Travis seems sick of talking about it in his song-by-song breakdown of the album, where he simply says, "It's just a brutal beatdown, talking about purging everything with fire, just deleting everything. It's just talking about how ridiculous we are." Now, before I declare Death Atlas to be nothing more than a broken record, there is something of a surprise on the next track, With All Disrespect. This one's a curiosity in that it spends 4.5 minutes spewing contempt at a specific target, but it never tells you who that target is. In discussing the song after the fact, Travis has said, "This is just a very point-blank call-out to the human race, with certain people in mind, but we won't really get into that." He's chosen this moment to be coy about what he's saying? Well, for a little more context, he also criticizes punk music for being too blatant with its fuck the government messages, implying that this song is his attempt at saying fuck the government himself, but more artfully, which apparently means in Latin. The lyrics do call these unnamed subjects parasitic, devoid of a soul, and a laughable charade of confidence, optimism, and opulence, which sounds like the government and the wealthy donors they serve, to me at least. You can have a lot of fun with this track, if you choose to imagine that those who bear the brunt of his ire are indeed those who actually are to blame. Only 2 songs remain after With All Disrespect, and you could probably tell me what they're about even if you've never heard them before. So we'll skip stating the obvious and talk about their stylistic similarities. Both of these songs shift gears from extreme metal to maudlin ambience halfway through, and suddenly enough to give you whiplash. Most of the other songs in this album do the same thing. It's a staple move in black metal, and one they've tried before, on Monolith of Inhumanity's closing tracks for example. I always skipped those last few tracks for precisely this reason. Their attempts at being self-serious and introspective have never been what I came to Cattle Decapitation for, and frankly, I just don't think they're very good at it. Death Atlas hasn't clicked with me since the day I received my pre-order back in 2019, and while I can extol the many virtues of any individual song therein, I find listening to 2 or 3 of them in a row to just be tiring. You'll never get the opportunity to listen to more than 3 songs in a row, though, due to the presence of 3 spoken word interstitial tracks, in which guest speakers like John Fishman from the band Phish discuss the human toll climate change threatens to inflict, expressing concerns for humankind that run contradictory to what the rest of the album has to say while breaking what little flow it had to begin with. I don't mind an album being challenging, but ideally, when an artist intentionally deprives their listener of enjoyment, it's so as to make a point that couldn't have been said any other way. Everything Death Atlas has to say was said better by Cattle Decapitation themselves on the far more enjoyable Anthropocene Extinction, and the unique additions they've made to their message are better left unsaid, because they're bad and wrong. The overt eco-fascist takes I've discussed are accompanied by crypto-fascist lyrics throughout, many of which are about as subtle as Sideshow Bob's chest tattoo. I mean, no one who speaks Latin could be an evil man. Whether or not the members of the band actually hold these awful views is anyone's guess. I'm inclined to believe that they're just making the same exaggerated, edgy statements they always have in a world that's become fucked up beyond satire. But the end result is the same, regardless. Consider Death Atlas to be a cautionary tale against nihilism and misanthropy, attitudes that inevitably lead to a place that is easily exploited by bad actors and useless to the pursuit of progress. All is not lost. Climate experts want everyone to know that we are not yet at the point of no return, and people are already making strides towards preventing the literal apocalypse, improving the state of the world little by little every day. If Cattle Decapitation's music sparked your interest in environmentalism, as they did for me long ago, the best way to honor that sentiment would be to educate yourself on the reality of the situation, and find ways to organize with those already doing the work. Just make sure to look for groups that put anti-fascism at the core of their agenda, and take what this band actually has to say with a grain of salt.